Hey everyone, it's Robert and you're watching Sidestep Adventures. Today we have returned to the Nix Cemetery, aka the 160-year-old cemetery that we found behind the dumpsters in the shopping center in Columbus. Now, today is going to be a really special video because I'm out here with Jeffrey Nix, a descendant of the people who's buried out here, and he's been trying for a very long time to get this cemetery taken care of. And this cemetery is going to look completely different today when you guys see it, and you're going to hear some of the stories about the people buried here today. But first, I wanted to go ahead and tell you that there's been a GoFundMe page set up for this cemetery. I'm going to leave a link in the top comments down there. And the cool thing is about this sort of thing is if 31,000 people watched the last video, if every one of them donated $1 to that GoFundMe account, then it would reach the goal that Mr. Nix is trying to get. And already he's raised about, I think, $190 in that GoFundMe. And he took that money and has already put it to use out in this cemetery. He hired somebody to come out here and do some cleanup. So I'm going to walk around with you real quick and we'll look at how much better it looks, and then we're going to hear some stories about the people buried here. So let's go. All right, so if you guys remember on the last video, all of these graves were just totally covered up in trash, and there were cans all over the place. And you can still see, obviously these have been cleaned off now, and there's been some cutting of the plants. Everything's been cut back, and it looks a whole lot better than it did before. But just in case you didn't see the other video, the whole cemetery looked like this trash pile that you see in the woods. But they've come out here already, thanks to that GoFundMe account, and done some cutting, some clearing, and some picking up of trash. It looks like right now they focused on this area over here, but you can see it looks a whole lot better. I'm really happy to see that this cemetery is being taken care of. And of course, there's still more work to do back there in that area. But since we're out here and we get the rare opportunity to hear the stories of the people buried here, I won't delay any longer. I'm going to get with Mr. Nix right now, and he's about to tell us some stories about the people buried out here.
I'm Jeffrey Nix. I was born and raised here in Muskogee County, Columbus, Georgia. I've lived here all my life. I became interested in genealogy about 30 years ago after my parents both passed away, and in about the mid-90s I discovered this cemetery. And over the years I have tried my best. I've raised hell with the city, I've raised hell with the newspapers. I have learned just about everybody I know about the cemetery and about it needs to be kept up and it needs to be maintained, because the city can't get involved in this kind of thing. Other than if people raise enough cane, sometimes they might relinquish, and if you put enough pressure on your counselor, they might relinquish and do something about it. But it's it's a one-shot deal. Now, I'm not trying to slap anybody that's already had a hand in helping me clean it up in the past, because they've done a great job. But what this cemetery really needs from now on is long-term perpetual care. And that's why I have set up that GoFundMe page. And I am even going as far, I don't have a lot, my wife and I don't have a lot of money saved back, but I'm willing to put down a huge chunk of what we do have, $500 toward that effort. I'll do that immediately. In fact, I've already done it. John Patrick bought the land that contained where he established his cemetery in 1858. He owned 50 acres of land at what is now the northwest corner of Floyd Road and Buena Vista Road. The first interment that we know of was that of Abraham Odom, who is buried over there in the corner where that dilapidated monument is now, or near there. At one time it stood upright. William here, he was of course born in 1842. He died in 1913 of a cerebral hemorrhage. As they called it back then, it was paralysis. He was a prisoner guard during the Civil War. And he also was a Mason. He actually rose the year of his death in 1913 to the rank of emeritus member, and was buried with Masonic honors. And of course, some Confederate veterans were there at the ceremony, or should I say the memorial. His wife Miriam Elizabeth Holliday No relation to Doc that I have been able to find, and believe me, I've looked. My dad swore for years we were related to Doc Holliday somehow. Never have found any proof of it. They got married here in Muskogee County. I think it was 1860. I think it was 1866. I think it was just after the war, and they were together for the rest of their lives. They were both Methodists. She was listed as a domestic in the census, of course, because back then, keeping a house with 9 surviving children was a full-time job. She had 9 surviving children. She had 3 other children that were, 2 of them that were stillborn, a set of twins, and then in 1888 they lost a 2-year-old son, Brewster Horace, who I'm sure is buried over there somewhere in an unmarked grave. But they lost him. You know, a lot of children back then, a lot of babies, were lost due to I think sudden death and death syndrome. They didn't know about that back then, but I think that's how they lost him. Bartow, also known as Louis or Bo, as his friends and family called him. Nobody outside the family knew those nicknames. He was hanged in 1919 for a double murder. Not proud of it, obviously, but he was determined to have advanced syphilis. Now, back during that time, syphilis was a very nasty disease. Well, you heard about Al Capone dying from it, from the complications around it. Well, we think it solely drove him crazy. In fact, during his trial, documents were presented that certify him as crazy, but the state doctor, Desportes, came back and said, no, he's faking in all he does, paraphrasing. So there was a big controversy about that. At any rate, despite last-ditch attempts to save him to the mental institution, he was hanged. And what's so in the documents I read, the newspaper reports I read, it's amazing the mob mentality. They wanted to string him up by lynching. In fact, one of the papers talked about when they were stretching the rope for the hanging, the legal hanging, they were talking about how the rope glistened in the sunlight. Now, say what you will, but I think that's just more than a little tacky, you know. My great-grandfather, John Wilbur, is buried over there. He was known as Wilbur in his life. Didn't go by John much. In his early days, of course, he helped out on the farm with the family. But then he became a sawmill worker. And then he became a farmer on his own account, as it were. And then he worked in the textile mill, Anderson Mill, which was also known as Meritus Mill in Columbus. And he lived up on, I think it was 38th Street. And he had just a little walk to the mill, because it was on 35th. So he just had a little walk to the mill. But he contracted pneumonia in 1932 and unfortunately passed away with it. It was double pneumonia. John Wilbur was also known as Lamb to his mother. I don't think he was referred to as Lamb by anybody else in the family, although it was in his obituary. A lot of people don't know that this cemetery, when it was made, this was still county out here. The city and county consolidated in 1971. So up until the latest burial that we know about is 1942, one of the Woods family out there, it was still the county out here. You're still looking at the boonies. And at that time, of course, this Beaver Road was just a dirt path. Samantha Wood, who was buried in there, she died of heart trouble. Her husband, I think, died of some kind of, I want to say, diabetes. The one I really had the most trouble tracking down any information on, like I said earlier, was Abraham Odom. He is just, there's so many Odoms. You got Abraham, you got Aaron, and back then they went by their initials, like A. Odom, or Abe Odom, or just all kinds of different nicknames. And it's very hard to pick out which is your ancestors they're talking about. I I have to laugh because the only alternative for me is just break down and cry. And I mean, I'm ready to break down and just blubber my eyes out, because these are my second great grandparents and my great grandparents on my dad's side, and they have literally been pooped on over the years. It boggles my mind. It boggles my mind. And folks, I know there's 100 other graves out there in the Muskogee County that need attending. And it's we had a cemetery society here in town from like 2010 to like almost 2013. And God bless him, I'm not gonna mention the man's name, but who headed it, but he got overwhelmed. And he just backed away from it because it was just so monumental of a task. Not only Muskogee County, he was trying to look after Lee County, Russell County in Alabama, and Harris County and Muskogee County in Georgia. But even just one county with over 100, you got the list, over 100 graves in it, 100 cemeteries, it is next to impossible for one man to take care of. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's even impossible for one person to try to take care of this. But I need to, and I'm not going to have too many more days ahead of me than I do behind me, you know. So I wonder, when I'm gone, what's going to happen. You know what, I might just cause a ruckus here. I might just put in my will that I be buried in this cemetery. You know, if there's any space, I need to get ground penetrating radar in here, which is expensive as all get out, to try to scan it and see if there's any open spaces, because I'll tell you what, I'd probably be inclined to sell mine and my wife's parcels at the big cemetery and use that money to beautify this one, and then get my butt buried over here in this cemetery. I guarantee you one thing, it'll sure as hell call attention to it. Absolutely. I mean, the health department might say, no, you're not doing that, but can you imagine the ruckus it would raise?
Right. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed seeing this cemetery again and hearing from Jeffrey Nix, not only the stories of the people that are buried here, but also his personal story with this cemetery. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out the GoFundMe account. Donate if you can. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.